Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special episode of Vito Glazers After Dark podcast, live at Turning Point USA in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm here with my esteemed guest, Eric Metaxas, best-selling author, film producer, and just light to the world. Eric, how does it feel to be on the podcast today?
Listen, that is so kind of you, so it feels encouraging to hear you say such hugely gracious and kind things. I'm thrilled to talk to somebody, that's you, who gets it, who understands the role of media in saving America and saving the world, how vital it is that we reach the culture with great media. That's been God's calling in my life, for my whole adult life. And so it's when you meet somebody who gets that, it's just encouraging.
Well, I'm grateful for your encouragement as well. And for those viewers that are watching my show here that might not be familiar with your work, Can you tell us a little bit about a couple of the bodies of work that you're most proud of, that you think have had the most impact, that people should be checking out?
Well, a lot of people know me from Socrates in the City. It's something I've been doing for over 20 years, really. It's amazing. But SocratesInTheCity.com, I interview people. It's usually long form, kind of like a PBS kind of thing. But we talk about the big questions, and it's always pointing to God, but it's not necessarily on the nose. But we're launching a streaming platform called Socrates Plus, where we've got a lot of our programs and new programs on there. But reaching the culture through Socrates and City over the years, literally millions of views of some of these conversations. And I think to myself, who knows who's being influenced? Who knows who's watching it? Because you can't really find this stuff anywhere else. And that's why we launched Socrates in the City. But that's a huge thing. A lot of people know me from that. A lot of people know me from my books, mostly my Bonhoeffer book. That was a million seller. A feature, $28 million feature film on the story of Bonhoeffer is coming out at in less than a year.
Amazing.
And that's been a huge labor for years and years and years to tell the story of Bonhoeffer. So that is unbelievably exciting. That's Angel Studios is distributing that. So there's so many different things that I've done. A lot of people know me from my radio show or my TV show, but oftentimes it's people that have read my books that they say that, I read your book like 5 years ago and it really moved me to love America or whatever. And I think that's a dream come true when you hear somebody say something like that.
Yeah, and as soon as we met, I was first introduced to you at the Investor Breakfast with Charlie Kirk randomly, and as soon as we met, I was so impacted by the conversation we had, I went home and I ordered Bonhoeffer on Amazon, and it's an amazing piece of work. I mean, it's longer than the Bible pretty much, so it's a big one.
That's not true. It's been translated into 20 languages, and as I said, it sold over 1 million copies because, look, let's be blunt. The story of Bonhoeffer is a mind-blowing, inspiring story. That's why people are hungry for true stories that are inspiring. And I can't tell you how many people have said to me that book changed their life. Now, it's not the book, it's his life, it's his story that is changing the lives of other people. And so the Bonhoeffer story continues to resonate, and it's something that is drawing people to God, to wanting to be courageous. What could be better than that? And I can't pretend that it was like my idea years ago. Somehow God led me to tell the story of Bonhoeffer, and now I see the results, but I cannot pretend that it was all my idea. And going farther than that, the new book that I just wrote called Letter to the American Church, it's only because I wrote the Bonhoeffer book that I wrote Letter to the American Church, which is out as a documentary film, coming out like in a couple of weeks. But the story of Bonhoeffer is a story for our time. And when I wrote it, I didn't know that. God knew that. And so the parallels to what happened to the German church with Bonhoeffer to where the American church is now are stunning. And that's why I wrote Letter to the American Church, because what happened then is happening now and people need to wake up.
So we're talking a lot about stories and storytelling. Yeah. One of the first interviews I did on Instagram that helped launch my following on social media was I had the opportunity to talk to Deepak Chopra, who's a great thought leader. And I thought I was going to stump him with this great question. I said, Deepak, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? And he told me the purpose of life is to share your story. If you're a one-celled amoeba, you're just passing on your DNA. That's your way of telling your story. Yeah. But if you're a human being, you can share your story from the stage and in book and in film. And that's why we hold actors to such high regard and we hold movie and film creators to such high regards. How did you first get into telling stories, and how did you get to where you are today as a storyteller?
It's so fascinating because people say like, oh man, you're a storyteller, you're great at storytelling. It never ever occurred to me that I would even want to do that. It's the weirdest thing. I mean, really, I knew I wanted to be a writer. When I was at Yale, I was an English major. I had not yet become a Christian or a conservative. And I was so lost. What am I going to do? What stories am I going to tell? What books am I going to... And when God came into my life, he led me on this path, and part of that path was in 2006, somebody came to me and said, would you write a biography of William Wilberforce? Because there was a movie coming out called Amazing Grace, the story of the great William Wilberforce. When he became a Christian, he said, I want to take my faith into politics and I want to lead the battle against the slave trade, this wicked thing. And so I said, so you're asking me, do I want to write a biography of this guy? I've heard about this guy. He's a real hero. Let me think about it. So I thought about it. I prayed about it. And suddenly I find myself writing this biography of one of these great, great heroes. And as I was doing it, if you had said to me any time before that, Eric, do you think you will ever write a biography? I would say, I can guarantee you I will never write a biography. So it was in the course of writing my book, Amazing Grace, about Wilberforce, that I realized, you know, this is important on many levels. First of all, I realized God has given me a gift to do it. I didn't know that. But, you know, that book was my first New York Times bestseller, and I thought, I can write in a way that people actually want to read it, because there's a lot of books about Wilberforce that you don't really want to read it, even though he's amazing. And it was in the course of that I realized, okay, so God has given me this gift of storytelling, and it communicates ideas better than anything else, because when you tell a story, especially a biography, people resonate with it. They pick it up kind of as they're being entertained, as they're following the story, they're picking up these ideas. So you don't need to talk about the ideas, you just need to tell the story. Absolutely. And so people kept saying like, oh, the Wilberforce book inspires me. Are you ever going to write another biography? I was like, I don't think so, I don't know. That's when I wrote the Bonhoeffer book. And suddenly I realized these stories inspire people. These stories change lives. And it's not like I set out to change lives. I just thought people need to know this story. It's an important story. It's a heroic story. But I realized that God uses the lives of people, oftentimes in book form, in movie form, in TV form, to move people, to change people. And that is something that, again, if you had said to me a number of years ago, you know, are you interested in this? I would say, nah, I don't, you know. So a lot of the stuff that happened to me in my life, it was God in my life. It was not me thinking, hey, I got a great idea.
Yep. Well, and you touched on something that I want to talk about with our audience here. So you said you were at Yale. You weren't a conservative yet. No. You weren't a Christian yet. As you know, I'm in Hollywood. I'm in the trenches. I've always been kind of a conservative in Hollywood. Yeah. And that's, at first it went against me, now it's working for me. But for you, how did that journey go for you? When did you realize that as a creator? Because usually authors and artists and producers, they tend to lean liberal. They almost feel pressured to be liberal.
I was.
So how did you realize that you wanted to become a conservative and support conservative movements like Turning Point USA and do conservative projects? And how did you overcome your fear of being canceled or being ostracized by the creative community?
It's pretty simple. I can take no credit. This is a miracle in my life. Around my 25th birthday, God spoke to me in a dream. If you go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, there's a video. I wrote about it in my book, Miracles. I wrote it in a more recent book called Fish Out of Water. God sovereignly, miraculously, supernaturally intervened in my life. I was lost. I was like afraid, like you said, like, I don't know, Christians, God needed to get a hold of me. And I was in enough pain that I was kind of like, God, if you're there, like, help me. But I didn't know he was there. He spoke to me in a dream. I've told that story many times. I told that on the Jordan Peterson podcast that people go to my Instagram, I think it's on there, but it was absolutely miraculous. I went to sleep one night not knowing if God is real, not knowing if you could even know if maybe he's real, but we can't know. And he spoke to me, and it just changed my life literally overnight. So before you know it, like, you can't go back. Like, I've become a Christian, and now, you know, all my friends from Yale, like, what happened to you? What happened to you? And I was like, you know what? I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do about this.
Sure.
I can't go back. I can't apologize to you. I can put the best face on it possible. I'll try to explain it to you, but I cannot deny what I now know. It's not like I have a theory. I know God is real, the Bible is true, Jesus is Lord. It's like once you know that, you're stuck.
Yes.
And I started moving conservative pretty quickly. I started saying that I believe these things, and it's been a real process for me. I've become more and more and more outspoken as a conservative because I see what's happening in the world. I've seen that many people in the church are afraid of being political, and I'm thinking, guess what? You need to get political. You need to understand God wants you to bring your faith into every sphere, not to keep it in some theological box. And frankly, that's what Letter to the American Church is about, the documentary Letter to the American Church. People can see the trailer, lettertotheamericanchurch.com, because Christians need to understand God calls you to take your faith into every sphere. And if you're going to some church that's not doing that, that's sitting on the sidelines, you're guilty of allowing everything to go to hell, figuratively and unfortunately also literally.
So that's a great point, and that's a great transition into this next part of the conversation I want to have. When we first met, we were at Charlie Kirk's Investor Breakfast. I think it was actually at the last America Fest.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been telling right-wing and conservative organizations for a long time is that we have to stop creating within an echo chamber. So what happens is right-wing production companies have stepped up, and Turning Point is amazing about the content they create, but a lot of the content that is created only appeals to people that are on the right already. So what we really need to do is start creating content that just brings people in from the middle.
And that is exactly God's calling on my life. Exactly
and I'm with you 100%.
Absolutely.
I think that's why we resonated. I wanted to get that documented because I wanted to explain to people how I seen in Hollywood, how I seen evil powers coming in. I seen the CCP coming in, and they bought all the movie studios. I seen them buy Forbes magazine. I seen them buy all the media houses. But they didn't just come out and hit us with transgenderism. They didn't come out and hit us with all the far left stuff. What they did was they took content and franchises that American people loved.
There you go. Disney
is doing the same thing. All of them are doing the same thing. And they don't come out and make films like What is a Woman? And I love Matt Walsh and I love his film What is a Woman, but that movie is not bringing anybody from the center over. It's only, even I'm on his side and I'm like, I'm so tired of these talking points. I don't need to hear it again. I'm already on your side. But what I noticed with the, like, for example, the movie studios, Boss Baby, right? Alec Baldwin, great franchise. They've got great movie. Americans love to be entertained, educated, and they want their personal financial situation to be improved. That's really all they care about. You got 5% extreme left, 5% extreme right, 90% in the middle somewhere. And what China did and what the powers that are against America did is they took franchises we love, and I use Boss Baby as an example because it's so obvious. Boss Baby 1, we love it, we take our kids to it. Boss Baby 2, it's amazing, it's a great sequel. Boss Baby 3, the baby's transgender. And that's how they integrate their thought process into the culture war. So what can we as film producers do to make content that resonates with our values, but also doesn't alienate people that don't already think like us? And how can we bring people from the middle onto our side?
That is absolutely, this is why we resonated when we met. That's exactly what God has called me to do. And I've already done it in my books. In my book on Bonhoeffer, my book on Martin Luther, my book, I wrote a book called Is Atheism Dead? All those books I wrote to reach people that they don't know what they believe. They're not already where we are. Now, maybe most of the people who buy the book will already be where we are, but I wrote all of my books, except for the Letter to the American Church, which is specifically aimed at the church, but every single book that I wrote is aimed at those people who don't share our values, to try to bring them along a little bit. I mentioned Socrates in the City. That's exactly what I'm doing with Socrates in the City. And frankly, a lot of people don't know how to do that. So if you know how to do that, you know how to do that, I know how to do that. Maybe because I went to Yale, I grew up in New York City, I can speak the language of the people that aren't where we are. And so I endeavor to speak that language and to reach those people. I've done it in those books and in everything that I do. And now I'm trying to do media projects, basically to fund media projects to do exactly the same thing, because I'm convinced that that's ultimately been God's call on my life. And there are people right now hungrier than ever. If you had done this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, a lot of people would. There's a hunger now for truth and clarity, especially since Hollywood and the media has gone insane. They've gone leftist, wacko. Your average American is like, I don't think so. If you can give them something to lead them in the other direction, they're going to be all over it in a way that they wouldn't have 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
It could be as simple as a cowboy movie where just a man and woman get married at the end and we make that look great.
I mean, can you imagine?
How extreme is that, right?
And that's where we are. That's why there's
Yeah.
great hope, and that's
Yeah.
why we're launching so many projects, and you know, as you are, because I really believe that's God's calling in my life. And I do believe, like we talked about, you know, when you tell a story, you bring people along. That is how many people process reality. They watch, they you know, and so sometimes you got to be on the nose, you know. Sometimes you got to make films that are aimed to bolster, you know, the conservative in his thinking, or the Christian. But there are other times you just want to speak to everybody, and I think we need both.
Yes.
But we've had far too little of what we're talking about, and so I'm thrilled to hear you say that, and I'm excited for the projects that we're working on right now, because I know that the hunger is there, that people are gonna love it.
I'm excited, and I want you to talk about the film as the last question, but before we get to talking about your latest film, what's one piece of advice that you could give creatives and influencers in Hollywood today that are watching this to maybe have the courage to create a story on their own and go off on their own without feeling like they can't tell the truth because they're afraid of what the industry will tell them?
Well, you know, you only live once. And I think that there are a lot of people that they don't understand how late the hour is, that to do the right thing, to work with people that get what we're talking about, it is so freeing, it is so beautiful. And I honestly think that to live in fear, to worry about like, oh, I don't want to lose my job, that's not the way to live. To live in fear is pathetic. It's so pathetic. People need to understand that you need to be free. And you know, I say to people of faith, you need to trust God, because he's actually with you. Like, that's not a nice idea. That's true. If you say, God, lead me in my career, he actually will. And I'm not just saying that as a nice idea. He has led me in my career, and it doesn't mean it's not going to be tough sometimes. So what? Even when it's tough, it's a joy because you're doing it. So to really be free and to tell the truth, I lived too much of my life with a little fear in there. And I think to myself, it's not the way to go. And so I want to encourage people, trust God much more radically than you do. Even if you lose your job, you'll get another job. You have no idea. People need to live out their faith as though it's true, because it actually is true, but you're not going to find out it's true unless you live it. You've got to live it.
Well, that's great advice, and I actually have a anecdote when it comes to Hollywood. Every time something has been a disaster that I thought my life was over, God was just getting me started. Every opportunity I lost launched me to my next and my next and my next from there. So be fearless. If you have a story in your heart, share that story, tell your story, and you only have one life to live your truth out. And Eric is living proof of how successful you can be going against the grain and just staying true to what you believe in. As we wrap up here, I know you have an amazing film coming out with Turning Point USA. It's called Letter to the American People. Can you tell us a little bit about that film, how it came to be, and where people can find more about it?
It's called Letter to the American Church, and it is, I am so excited. I mean, I can't even tell you. It's amazing to me, because I wrote the book. I never dreamt. All of my other books I want to turn into streaming TV series and all this stuff, and that's what God has called me to do, called me to the culture. This book, I never dreamt of turning this into a film. I spoke about this book, Letter to the American Church, and 2 Hollywood veterans came up to me and said, we want to make a documentary film. So we partnered with Turning Point. The film will be out very soon. You can go to lettertotheamericanchurch.com to watch the trailer, but it blows my mind that this is now a documentary film. It just absolutely thrills me. And I think I mentioned we're launching Socrates Plus, a streaming platform. So there is a lot going on. It's been a long journey, but I know God is with me, and you know, we were saying it earlier, it's the only way to fly.
It's exactly right. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very special episode of Vito Glazers After Dark Live from Turning Point USA. Thank you so much to my guest, Eric Metaxas, the mind behind Letter to the American Church. You can find more all about that online. We're going to put the link in the bio here. And we want to send a big thank you to Turning Point USA for putting on this event, and to Fisher Capital for being the diamond sponsor of this event 2 years in a row. Thank you for your support. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and we'll see you next time.